Good morning. Recognizing a quorum, I am calling this meeting of the Cannabis Control Commission to order at 10:01 a.m. on July 20th, 2020. This meeting is being recorded. My best wishes for the health and safety of all those listening in. I want to, as always, thank our Chief of Staff, Erica Chabelli, for all the hard work she does organizing, coordinating these meetings. So thank you, Erica. If you could put up the agenda, please. There's really only one agenda item today, which is the commission discussion and vote on draft regulations. I will go through the rest of the regulatory calendar at the end, but the only agenda item that we'll cover is the discussion and vote on draft regulations. As usual, I have no idea how long this will take. We'll take appropriate breaks as necessary, but it's hard to forecast, but we'll get through as efficiently as possible. I want to talk about how we're going to go through this. We're going to work off the documents prepared by Deputy General Counsel Wen. I guess this is a good time to thank the entire legal team, certainly our General Counsel Christine Bailey, but particularly Deputy General Counsel Wen, who really organized all of the work on these draft regulations. So thank you to the entire legal team, and thank you to staff. Staff from all departments participated in the development of these draft regulations. So it really was a commission-wide effort, and my thanks to everybody involved. So we're going to go through the documents prepared by Deputy General Counsel Wen, and we'll do it in four sections. First, we're going to cover by topic those topics that were discussed at the previous meeting that we had on policy. It makes sense to go through it by topic rather than going through the regulations in sequence, because based upon the policy decisions that we made a few weeks ago, multiple changes in multiple sections of the regs are affected, and so by going topic by topic, we can cover all of the recommended changes to the regulations. As we go through topic by topic, I just want to mention a few things. One is we should not relitigate the policy decisions that we made a few weeks ago. The purpose of going through the draft regulations topic by topic is to make sure that those regulations as drafted reflect and match the policy decisions that we made a few weeks ago. Clearly, if there are any ambiguities or omissions, that's fair game as well. But again, my request to my fellow commissioners is that we not relitigate the policy decisions that were made a few weeks ago. So we'll go through all of the changes recommended topic by topic. That'll be the first part of the meeting, probably the longest part of the meeting. Secondly, we'll cover definitions. Most of the recommended changes to definitions come from the agreements on policy and the topics that we're going to cover in the first part, but there are other proposed changes to the definitions made by staff or my fellow commissioners that are outside of those changes, and I'll highlight those and we'll go through those changes one by one to make sure people are comfortable with that. Third section of the conversation will be on the co-located regulations. Just for context, when we assumed authority for the medical marijuana industry in December of 2018, I believe it was, we did what we called a lift and shift. We said we were not going to make any changes to the medical regulations, that we wanted to ensure that we made the transfer from DPH with minimal disruption. So we just literally lifted and shifted. And had to develop a set of regulations to deal with the co-located facilities that now would have both medical and adult use. Those co-located regulations no longer seem necessary, and it seemed appropriate not to have a third set of regulations. So we moved all of the co-located, or the staff moved all of the co-located regulations into the appropriate section of the medical and adult use regulations, and the effort is to eliminate this third group of regulations, the co-located regulations, but we need to go through that and make sure people are comfortable that we've covered everything there. I did want to give special kudos at this point to Christopher Smith, our Associate General Counsel, who led this effort and did a painstaking job of mapping every single regulation in the co-located regulations to the appropriate section in the medical and adult use regulations. So thank you, Christopher. Finally, I'm going to leave room and time for other issues that commissioners want to mention or bring up. I want to put a caveat around that, which is that there's not a whole lot of time. If there's not draft regulatory language already in place, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to include any additional issues in the draft regulations that will be promulgated shortly. But I certainly wanted to grant my fellow commissioners the option to raise issues that they think they're imperative that were not covered in the previous parts of our conversation today. On the advice of counsel, I'm planning on only asking for 2 motions and 2 votes at the end. One is to approve all 3 sets of regulatory changes, that is for medical, adult use, and co-location. And the second motion and vote would be to authorize the staff to do the appropriate editing, ministerial changes, formatting, and filing of these of the draft regulations. So those will be the 2 motions at the end of the day that I'll ask for a vote on. Finally, one last comment before we get started. I have asked our executive director, Mr. Collins, to be an active participant in this meeting. He clearly doesn't have a vote at the end of the day, but he has an awful lot to contribute in terms of his own perspective on the industry, as well as implementation challenges that might arise from some of the contemplated regulatory changes. So, Sean, I welcome and hope for your active involvement in this conversation. Before we jump into it, any questions or comments from my fellow commissioners? Okay. So again, we're going to work off the document that Deputy General Counsel Wen sent out to both the Commission and to the public last week. It goes through, by my count, 40 different topics. We'll cover them one by one. And for each topic, there's both the recommendation that was made, logic behind that recommendation, and then the proposed regulatory language changes right below. So if that's okay, let's get started. And the first topic is greenhouse definition. So can I ask my fellow commissioners, are there any concerns, questions, or can we move on? I guess I'd appreciate it. Okay, Commissioner McBride, you have a question?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I had a question about just the process for today.
Sure.
So if there are issues that are included in this draft of regulations that were not brought up during the policy discussion, how are we going to be dealing with those?
I think we should, there are no policy discussions, and therefore there's no policy discussion to relitigate. I think we need to, if there's a policy concern, we need to discuss it today.
Okay, so if it wasn't brought up on June 19th,
correct,
is a policy concern, we're going to talk about it. Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna rely on both council as well as each of the commissioners to to raise those topics if they have those concerns or want to make sure they're addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you for raising that, Commissioner McBride. So it would be helpful if the commissioners put their screens on so I can see them, but because I want to get a question, I want to make sure I'm getting response to questions. But my first question is topic 1, which is greenhouse definition. Are there any questions or concerns before we move on? Okay, I'm going to take that as that we're fine with greenhouse definitions. The second topic is fingerprint checks, where the recommendation was to amend adult use regulations to be consistent with Commission's practice and with FBI DC JIS requirements. These changes provide applicants who are subject to the fingerprint-based check requirement with additional notice. And underneath that language again is the regulatory language changes that are suggested. Any concerns with this section, or people comfortable? Okay. I'm going to move on to topic 3, which is equity ownership threshold for social equity program participants to receive license-related benefits. The recommendation that we agree to is to require 51% or more equity ownership by social equity participants for fee waivers and discounts. allow fee waivers and discounts to apply to micro businesses and Office of Supplier Diversity certified minority-owned, veteran-owned, and women-owned businesses who are also deemed to be small businesses by the Commission to access the same fee waivers and discounts. Are there comments or questions on this one or concerns? Commissioner McBride?
So I had a question about the definition of small business.
Yes.
So the question is, and I just might need to be educated on this. It says that has gross revenues of $15 million or less as reported to the Massachusetts Department of Revenue the year prior to the date of the licensee's initial or renewal application. I think that we should probably strike out the initial or that phrase, because I don't know how a licensee prior to getting a license is going to have any revenues to report to the Department of Revenue.
So you're suggesting just striking out the word initial, the words initial or?
Yes, and maybe, and if there's a disagreement or if someone could if there's a, I guess I'm asking the question about whether there's something I'm missing here, but it seems that if they don't have a license, they're not going to have revenues to report.
That makes sense to me. I welcome, I've not tracked back to who the writing teams were for each of these topics. So if the commissioner that's responsible for the writing team has a comment on that, or if our legal staff has a comment on that, what you said made sense to me, Commissioner McBride, but I want to hear from others. Which commissioner's legal team?
Yes, that was me and the legal team. I think that's a good point. Yes, we can strike that.
Okay. Okay, let's do that. Any other comments or concerns about this this topic? I must say, as I thought about this, from a business world, $15 million to me is not a small business. It's more of a mid-sized business. And certainly if you look at like the private equity world, you know, the range of businesses from 5 to 20 is usually called mid-market, 5 to 20 million. So 15 seems high. On the other hand, if it's consistent with other state regulations, I'm fine with it. I just wanted to raise that topic. I'm not proposing any language change here, but I just wanted to raise that issue. Commissioner Title?
I agree, Mr. Chairman. This was lifted from other regulations, but I believe the consensus of the commission was that we wanted to start smaller and then expand the group if we could. So okay. If you have a proposal for a smaller limit, I think that makes sense.
You know, as I said, you know, this is from the business world, so it's not completely apropos. But you know, 5 to 20 is mid-market. So I would say I'd be comfortable moving it down to 10. I'd be even more comfortable moving it down to 5. That might be too dramatic. I'll defer to you, Commissioner Title, since your group spent a lot of time talking about this and studying this issue.
I would be fine with 5 if the other commissioners are fine with that as well.
Okay. Commissioners McBride and Flanagan?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Thank you. Any other topics in this section? Or any other issues in this topic? I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Director. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out too that this is going to, the change itself is consistent with the conversation from the 19th. What we'll have to do as a result, though, it'll require a bit of forecasting. This does require that the minority business enterprise, be it women-owned, veteran-owned, or minority-owned, they be certified with OSD. So currently, as far as securing expedited application review, we ask for an affidavit as well as that they had taken the beginning class and begin their certification process. Right. This does require that they be certified. So similar to the concerns about not having revenue in place, OSD in their certification process will not certify a business that is not currently operating. So that could create a tension as far as the initial application fee.
Do you have or thought about how we can address that, Mr. Executive Director?
I don't. I just want to raise it for the Commission's consideration here, and then also wanted to flag for your consideration too that the reduction of fees is obviously going to impact the revenue we generate, and so we'd have to calculate an adjustment there as well as far as our forecasting is concerned.
Sure, sure. I guess from my perspective, in the spirit that these are draft regulations, I welcome public comment on this, but it also allows us between now and then to also do the kind of analysis you described, Mr. Executive Director. But thank you. I think those are both legitimate concerns. Any comments or suggestions based upon Mr. Collins' comments? Okay. And anything else in this section? Okay, then let's move on to the next section, which is the social equity program, where the recommendation is to create regulatory flexibility for the commission to add new groups via vote and expand social equity program eligibility to individuals associated with an economic empowerment applicant who meet one of the equity ownership criteria for EEA status. So we discussed this. That seemed like a pretty straightforward change, but let me ask, are there any questions or concerns on this section? Okay. The next topic is diversity plans. Scroll down to that. The recommendation here is to replace the word minorities referenced in the diversity plan requirements with people of color, particularly Black, African American, Latinx, and Indigenous people. Are there any questions or concerns about this? Okay. The next topic is delivery licenses and license endorsements. Scroll down to that, where the recommendation is give the commission flexibility to choose to expand delivery licenses and delivery endorsements to cooperatives and Office of Supplier Diversity certified women, minority, veteran-owned businesses during the exclusivity period. Any questions on that? Any comments? Okay. Next topic is economic empowerment applicants. And there are several recommendations here. The first recommendation is to require economic empowerment priority applicants to continue to meet 3 of the 6 criteria, at least one of which must be a majority equity ownership criteria to maintain EEA status. Second is to require EEAs to report to the commission all changes of ownership and control. And third is to require economic empowerment applicants to certify the commission as part of a renewal application that the requisite ownership and control has been maintained by the requisite class of people identified on the EEA certification. Are there any questions or comments? I think we discussed this quite thoroughly at our policy committee meeting, so I hope there aren't any issues with the recommendations, but I just want to make sure that people are comfortable that the proposed changes in regulatory language reflect the decision that we made. Okay. The next topic is persons or entities with direct control. Several recommendations here as well. First is to update the definition of persons or entities with direct control by changing subsection D2 to encompass the equivalent of a director in a business entity such as a limited liability company, which has managers in lieu of board of directors. Second change suggested is changing subsection D5 to set a bright line dollar amount with respect to what the commission considers significant contracts. And 3, explicitly including persons or entities appointed as a receiver as having direct control. Comments or questions on this? Well, I'll tell you, the early indication is that the legal team deserves kudos, given that the drafting seems to be very consistent with the language, with the decisions that were made by the commission at our last meeting. So thank you very much. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have other issues going forward, but thus far, thank you so much. Topic number 9 is notification and approval of changes, where the recommendation is delegate to the executive director certain authority to approve certain application/license changes, and adding a new subsection to spell out the types of changes the executive director is authorized to approve. Again, we discussed this relatively thoroughly at our policy meeting a few weeks ago, but are there any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes, yes, of course. If you could keep your camera on, Mr. Executive Director,
Sure.
That gives everybody the chance to look at you. But B, it'll make it easier for me just to know when you have a comment.
Sure. So at this one, I think I just want to lay out a bit of process moving forward too. Is the commission has historically, since its inception, over time delegated a number of things. This, I think, codifies some of it in regulation, which I think is certainly a good policy decision for you to consider. What I'd also intend to do at a subsequent meeting after these regulations are finalized is try to compile all of those historic delegations as well into one cohesive document, which can then be readopted if the commission so chooses. But that way, at this point, every time there's a question, we do have to go back historically and try to pinpoint the time. Right. This, I think, would be a good practice and a good habit. So my intention would be, in addition to this delineated regulatory process, is seek a clean version and a new delegation. It wouldn't be a new request, it would just be a recodified version.
Right. No, I think that's a great idea, Mr. Executive Director. I would ask you in that document to include one other thing, which is reporting. Given that these authorities have been delegated to you, what your commitment and intention would be with respect to reporting those decisions to the commission?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other comments on this section? Okay, then let me move on to topic 10, excuse me, which is receivership. This is a relatively new part to the regulations. Let me just get down there, excuse me. And the recommendation here that we agreed to was establish a process for circumstances where marijuana establishments and medical marijuana treatment centers are placed under the control of a receiver by a Massachusetts court or otherwise designated, including requiring notice and pre-approval by the commission. This is a new topic, so most of the changes here to the regulations are additions rather than deletions or modifications. Any questions or comments on this? We did discuss this again very thoroughly. Commissioner McBride?
So I had some questions about how these provisions would sort of play out and what our role would be. So I guess I wanted to understand a little bit better what we are envisioning the role of the receiver to be, and specifically, I think what our role is here.
Okay, I'm going to try. I don't know if Christopher Smith on the call.
So, Chairman, this is Christine Bailey. I'm happy to answer questions if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. And this is my group as well. So why don't you go ahead, Christine, and then I'll add in if I think necessary. But thank you.
Sure. So my understanding of this regulation is that the writing group wants to set up some parameters for when a marijuana establishment or an MTC is in distress. The idea here is for the commission to have an opportunity to vet some potential receivers. In other words, see if they pass the background checks, have the relevant experience, so that if and when a receiver is appointed by the court or the court reaches out to the commission to ask about a receiver, there is someone who's gone through a certain level of vetting. It's also important, I think, from the writing group's perspective, that that receiver have an understanding of the commission's regulatory requirements. My understanding is that the word receiver was used here so that the person would not necessarily have a permanent role, but would have a temporary role. In other words, doing something to resolve the issues of the business, but not necessarily be involved in the long term. So I think there is an acknowledgement here that the court would have a role as well here. In other words, at some point, a court might appoint a receiver. the court may or may not take the commission's receiver, but the hope is here that we would at least lay some groundwork.
Thank you, Christine. I guess I just want to bring it up to just slightly higher level, Commissioner McBride, and then get back to you, make sure we're getting to your questions. This change was, first of all, modeled on, I believe, the state of Washington. We did not have anything in our regulations with respect to receivership, as everybody knows, because these businesses are not legal federally. Bankruptcy court is not an option for a struggling business, so their receivers are appointed. The primary objective is that our change of control process, while I think appropriately diligent and thorough, takes a while. And in the cases of financial distress, we didn't think that was an option. We thought we'd have to move more quickly to approve the appointment of a receiver, and the change of control implied in that. So that's really the change we're trying to make here, by pre-certifying where possible the receivers and giving the executive director the right to approve that for a pre-certified receiver. So the issue here is just to try to get this to be as efficient and as speedy as possible given the circumstances. But I'm more than open if you think we've missed something or there's some complexities that we haven't considered, Commissioner McBride.
Okay, so that's helpful. So I guess my concern is that understanding the desire for being expeditious and efficient here, Attorney Bailey sort of made a reference to the courts, and I guess my concern here is that I don't think that this section, I'm having trouble sort of figuring out how it meshes with the existing receivership laws and the role of the courts here, because there are there's a specific process for appointing a receiver, and the way that the way that this is drafted, it sort of it expands our role, in my view, quite significantly, and it gives us a lot of power here, and I'm not sure that it's power that meshes up with the primacy of the court when it comes to appointment. So I guess my request here would be that we look a bit more closely at this particular section of the regulations and make sure that it is consistent with receivership, right? It's consistent with the process for receivership that's set out already, and that there are rules of civil procedure that apply to it currently, and that we're making sure that we are understanding that we want to be appointing a receiver or making a recommendation, right? We want to have the vetted list, and we want to have people that know what they are doing. I just think that we need to look a bit more closely about the limits of our authority here and how we would potentially be interacting with the courts in the appointment of a receiver. So I guess during the public comment period, I would ask for us to reflect on that, maybe ask for our legal department to reflect on that a bit, but also acknowledge it to the legal community, to folks who might be watching this, that if they have comments specific to that, I would certainly welcome that. I want to make sure that if we are doing this, it's really important. The utility of it is definitely relevant, but I want to make sure that we're doing it right. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner McBride. General Counsel Bailey, do you have any comments back to Commissioner McBride?
I appreciate Commissioner McBride's observations and comments, and I can, in coordination with the executive director, reach out to appropriate stakeholders and pay careful attention to any public comment we might receive for those attorneys who specialize in this area. So I'm happy to follow up in advance of the policy discussions on the final regulations with a legal opinion, if that's helpful.
Commissioner McBride, is that okay?
I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments on receivership before we move on to the next topic? Okay, thank you. The next topic is craft marijuana cooperatives. The recommendation was to open up restrictions on farmer involvement by allowing a craft marijuana cooperative to rent land from a farmer who has filed a Scheduled F tax form within the past 5 years, instead of having the farmer be a member of the cooperative. Any comments on that? Relatively straightforward agreement or change? Okay. Topic 12 is marijuana research facility licenses and research permit. Several recommendations here. One is to establish a process for applying to conduct research using regulated sources of marijuana or marijuana products cultivated, produced, or sold by licensed MEs or MTCs in Massachusetts. Second, and this is new, is to add a $1,000 fee for a research permit to the fee schedule in 500.005. 3, establish what is allowed for research, and 4, establish research permit as a requirement to conduct research, and establish what is necessary to apply for and receive a research permit. This is mostly new language. There's a few changes to our existing regs, but mostly new language, including adding a additional fee into our fee table for the research permit. Are there comments or questions on this? Okay. Topic 13 is independent testing laboratories modifying ISO certification. ISO certification. Let me just flip down to that. And here, the recommendation is to allow independent testing laboratory applicants to submit their ISO certification prior to final licensure. Any questions on this? Or comments, concerns? Okay. Topic 14 is agent registration. Multiple recommendations. One, first renewal for agent occurs after 12 months. Subsequent registration renewals occur every 3 years instead of every year. Increase application and renewal fee for medical or for marijuana establishment and laboratory agents from $100 to $115. Amend the MDC agent registration section of the medical use of marijuana regulations to make it consistent with requirements under the adult use section, including matching up paragraph and subparagraph letters and numbers. That's more administrative. There were things that were rejected by this group, or at least not recommended for change, including a free agent model for agents, and no change to the regulations requiring agents to carry multiple badges until a technical solution is developed. Any questions or comments on this section? Okay. Topic 15 is leadership rating programs, and they're actually starting to become relevant now that people have been in business for a year. They are now starting to be able to apply for leadership ratings. So there were multiple recommendations here, clarifying criteria for the Social Justice Leadership Award, given that the Social Equity Training and Technical Assistance Fund has not yet been established by the legislature. Changes to the Energy Environmental Leadership Award, adding a leadership program to medical, changing some criteria for the compliance leadership rating program, and change the local employment leader rating to include supporting other local businesses. Any questions or comments on those recommendations and the draft language that has been developed to reflect those decisions?
Yes.
Commissioner Title?
I just have a couple of minor, I think, suggestions for the social justice leadership rating.
Please go ahead.
Under 3A4, just consistency in the way that we describe The groups were encouraging. Earlier on, we discussed staff-led changes to the diversity plan language, which I think was very good. I think if we just copy that over to this line, that'll be consistent.
That makes sense. Any question? Okay, keep going, then I'll just make sure the other commissioners are okay with what you're suggesting. Keep going.
Thanks. And just one other change. So for the last one, or a minimum of 20 hours of each staff member's paid time is contributed to local community development initiatives in a year. I just want to make that slightly more specific to make sure it's relative to social justice. So what I would suggest is for medical to add to support patients, to specifically support patients, and for adult use to add to specifically support communities disproportionately harmed by prohibition.
Sure. Thank you. Commissioners McBride and Flanagan, any comments or questions for Commissioner Title?
The only concern that I have is that in the positive impact plans, there are some volunteer efforts that businesses are participating in that don't necessarily go to social justice or equity, but go towards the towns that have been disproportionately impacted. So my concern would be the establishments that have already said they're going to do like water cleanups or environmental cleanups or things like that wouldn't necessarily be in that category, but they're taking a role in the community that they've established as a DIA. So if we don't make it as specific to say social justice or equality, then we allow them to be participating in their communities that however they chose, because we don't tell them what to do for their impact plans. Like I think there are some, was it Brockton or New Bedford, that were going to participate in environmental cleanups along the water. I think New Bedford was one, or Fall River. To me, they're taking part in it, but it's just not going towards that category. So I'd be concerned that they wouldn't be eligible for this.
Commissioner Title?
Would it address the concern if we said to specifically support disproportionately harmed people as defined by the commission, and then that would go back to those same 5 groups that we've already identified?
I'd rather do that because, again, just taking environmental cleanups and beach cleanups and all that, they're already in the disproportionately impacted areas. So that at least is going to capture the positive impact plans that we've had come before us.
Can I ask first of all, Commissioner McBride, did you have a comment? Can I ask General Counsel, did you capture the conversation between Commissioners Title and Flanagan well enough to get the language they agreed to?
I think I did. What I'm seeing is that perhaps we want to give the commission a role in having some flexibility here, but the essential point is to make sure that we do not place those licensees who have already gotten approved plans in a difficult situation. So there might be some grandfathering here for past plans and some flexibility for future plans going forward. Does that make sense?
Well, I think more narrowly, General Counsel, Commissioner Title proposed, based upon the comments from Commissioner Flanagan, Commissioner Title proposed a modification to the language that I think Commissioner Flanagan said would work. So I was just wanting to make sure you got that specific language that Commissioner Title recommended.
Okay.
Could you try to re-articulate that? I'm sorry.
I don't think that, given what Commissioner Title said, there needs to be grandfathering.
Okay.
Because we're going to allow the 5 cohorts anyway.
Again,
Okay.
There was language that Commissioner Title suggested that dealt, or at least Commissioner Flanagan, you said addressed your concerns, and I want to just make sure that there's a clear record of exactly what that language is. So
yeah, I'm clear on the language. I would like to ask just another point of clarification of Commissioner Title, if I may.
Sure, please go ahead.
On the medical side, I would assume that they have to benefit patients and caregivers. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, good catch.
Thank you, General Counsel. Are we okay on this topic, or any other comments or concerns? Okay. Topic 16 is priority review and expedited review. This is to codify a decision that was made at a commission meeting on October 10th, 2019, and was voted on 4-1 by the commission in favor, which is about how MTCs can retain their priority RMD status, and it requires that the licensure must be maintained and eligible for priority treatment for that location. We did have a conversation at the commission about this. I think Commissioner Doyle was the commissioner that raised this motion. We discussed it and voted on and approved it by a 4-1 vote. And this is just an attempt to codify that into the regulations. Are there any questions or concerns about this? Okay. Topic 17 is social consumption delivery application requirements. The recommendation is to clarify and expressly state that the two-part application, the pre-certification and the provisional license application, applies to both social consumption and delivery only, while also separating additional requirements pertinent to the respective licenses. Are there questions or comments on this? Okay. Next topic is delivery, topic 18. Give me a second. Multiple recommendations here. First, allow the delivery of marijuana accessories and branded goods. 2 is allow delivery license and endorsements to directly sell marijuana accessories and branded merchandise. 3, change delivery only licensee to delivery licensee. 4, clarifying the general requirements for a marijuana retailer, that a marijuana retailer must have a delivery license in order to deliver marijuana or marijuana products. 5, allow delivery licensee to be an owner or have a controlling interest in the cultivation, product manufacturing, social consumption, establishment, research, retail, or transportation license. Are there questions or concerns about this? Okay. Topic 19 is vendor training. Sorry, a lot of scrolling to do. Multiple recommendations here. So in addition to the current program for marijuana establishments, establish a program for MTCs, clarifying training requirements, establishing a basic and advanced core curriculum, including delivery-specific responsible vendor training requirements, clarify that the program is mandatory and subject to enforcement, incorporate criteria for teaching online, which right now is a waiver, but clarify the criteria for approving that waiver, establish definitions of RVT, basic core curriculum and advanced core curriculum, modify the definition of responsible vendor training to remove some duplicative portions, and clarify that training related to written policies and procedures developed by social consumption establishments can be delivered, can be training delivered by the marijuana establishment rather than have to be taught by a responsible vendor trainer. So multiple changes there. Any questions or comments or concerns? Okay. Topic 20 is personnel policy, specifically code of ethics and whistleblower policy. Any questions or comments on just one recommendation, which is requiring licensees to include a code of ethics and a whistleblower policy among their personnel records subject to inspection by the commission? Excuse me. Okay. Topic 21 is workplace safety. Multiple recommendations to incorporate OSHA standards and to add to the general operational requirements for marijuana establishments and MTCs so they have policies and procedures consistent with OSHA standards. And we're okay? Topic 22 is waste receptacles. And this is just about consistency between 501 and 502. Any questions or comments? Topic 23 is fire safety requirements. And again, this is about consistency. It's adding a requirement for additional operational requirements, engaging in product manufacturing and cultivation, have policies and procedures to ensure compliance with the Massachusetts Fire Code. Are there any issues or questions on this one, on this topic? Okay, topic 24 is limited access areas. Two recommendations. One, make clear that restrictions on entry to limited access areas only apply following receipt of a final license. And second, to create the ability to have limited access areas that overlap in hallways or access points, but still require operations and access to agents to be separated based upon license type. Okay. Topic 25 is buffer zones. And here the recommendation is change how the 500-foot buffer zone distance is measured by considering actual accessibility to a medical establishment or MTZ from a school site and taking into account impassable barriers such as highways or rivers when measuring the 500-foot buffer zone distance. Commissioner McBride.
I would just like to see us define impassable barrier. We have a analogies, but having a definition I think would be helpful.
Great. Commissioner, General Counsel, is there any issue with that definition?
Chair, if I could ask Commissioner Title for her thoughts on that, since she was the lead on this.
Sure. Commissioner Title?
I think the intent was a barrier that blocks pedestrian travel, but I'm certainly open to adding a definition. I don't know offhand what it would be.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Flanagan.
I think during a previous meeting, I had suggested that we contact DOT and see if they have a type of definition.
Okay. That sounds reasonable to me.
Given it's highways and roads and tracks or whatever.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, if you want to assign me to, I can do what I can do before the final, I'm sorry, the draft regulations are filed. But if I need to do more after that, I can reach out to appropriate stakeholders and try to clarify that.
Well, let's do the best we can prior to the filing of this, and the comment. I welcome public comment on this, and if we need to modify it as part of our final regulation draft, we'll do so.
Thank you.
Any other comments, or Commissioner McBride, does that address your concern?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, Mr. Executive Director? You look like you're getting ready to say something.
No, nothing to add.
Okay. Commissioner Flanagan, you okay with where we are?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to topic 26, which is advertising, marketing, and branding. There are a lot of recommendations here, so I'm not going to read them all, but it's allowing brand name includes allowing a brand name sponsorship, where MEs and MTCs can sponsor events but not advertise to underage participants. Allow employee but not consumer discounts, allow medical establishments to target their advertising via mechanisms like geofencing, clarify that neon signs are prohibited, and finally eliminate certain advertising restrictions in the medical regulations because the restrictions do not apply to persons that are under 21 years of age or do not apply to medical use program. So it's a pretty extensive set of proposed regulatory changes. Are there questions or comments on these? Commissioner McBride.
So I would like to add a provision that would require marijuana establishments engaging in brand name sponsorship to retain documentation of their composition data. We're changing, or the suggestion is here that we are changing how MEs can go about advertising and sort of deciding where they're going to be able to sponsor activities. And I think that asking them to retain the data that they're basing that on is pretty reasonable.
Okay, I agree with that. Comments from Commissioners Titler or Flanagan?
I agree with that. I thought they had to keep it anyway.
Commissioner Titler, and then I want to ask General Counsel. Commissioner Titler, any comments on that?
No, it makes sense to me.
General Counsel, are you okay with that? Is that already, you believe, covered, or is that something that we could easily add as an additional requirement?
Well, we'll look at the language that exists and make it abundantly clear.
Okay.
I drafted some language that I'm happy to share with council as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there
Can
other?
I ask one question about this though?
Yeah, Commissioner Flanagan, please go ahead.
Is this, and maybe Commissioner McBride knows, the composition data, is that part of any kind of inspection documentation that our enforcement council would already have?
I'm not sure that it is. So I think that making it clear, because we're changing slightly the framework, making it clear that that composition data is a key component. And I think that having them preserve it for a limited period of time, right? Just enough time to sort of identify, if they're going to be taking on kind of a marketing scheme, how that marketing is being decided upon, I think would be helpful, and probably also, would also, I would imagine, be helpful for, purposes of research and things like that, so that we sort of know how audiences are identified.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Executive Director, any issues as far as the implementation of what we just discussed?
No, Mr. Chairman. I think just to respond to Commissioner Flanagan's question a bit more around would we have access to it? I think we would have access to it in the normal course if we had asked for it. If we had a question or an investigation perhaps that was relative to their advertising, we would certainly ask for that information, but it isn't something we would normally gather in a routine inspection. So I think making it explicit here is not a problem for us. In the event that it was not available during the normal course, we would have to find a different avenue to try to gather it. So asking them to retain it for a period, I think, is a addition that we would certainly welcome. So no issues as far as implementation. In fact, I think, especially with this change, it would be helpful context to add to the adjustment.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on this section, the advertising, marketing, and branding topic? Okay. Topic 27 is packaging and labeling, where we have multiple recommendations. Require the packaging be child-proof, require that all containers of finished marijuana product be labeled with customary unit first and metric unit second. Remove requirement that purchased items are bagged in a sealed bag. Replace that with takeaway bag. And reorder some provisions in the medical use regulations to align with the adult use regulations. Any comments or questions on this section? Sorry, a lot of scrolling to do. Next topic is concentrate and vaporizing labeling. Multiple recommendations, including specifying that additives included on the FDA's list of inactive ingredients for inhalation shall be called out. Require that vaporizers include a statement about whether terpenes are used to produce them are solely derived from cannabis or come from non-cannabis sources. Require producers of vaporizers to provide certificates of analysis for all additives. And then finally require vaporizer producers to collect information about the component parts that they use in producing the vaporizer, including information on battery type, coils, and hardware. Any comments on this section, on this topic? Mr. Executive Director, can I ask your thoughts on this? Given how much research you've done, and I know we're going through a public comment period right now on vaporizing, but do you feel like this gets to what is needed in terms of the issues and concerns that you've identified in the process?
Absolutely. I think this is not only wholly consistent with the administrative process we've taken, but I think uses the research we've been conducting in the interim and builds upon it. So especially the information around the devices and the hardware themselves, I think will be really valuable moving forward, especially as it seems as though that hardware across the country has improved and adjustments have been made. We want to make sure we're gathering that information that consumers and patients can make informed decisions, especially as they conduct their own research. So yes, I think this is consistent with what we've done and like I said, builds upon it, in fact.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I don't know which writing group did this, but my compliments to them. I thought this is a really thorough and very thoughtful job, so thank you. Any other comments before we move to the next topic? Okay, topic 29 is vape sales. The recommendation is to add an additional operational requirement for retail sale to require marijuana retailers to post certain information about the testing of marijuana vaporizer devices at the point of sale and to make information available to consumers who requested about the source and testing of vapes. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Topic 30 is indoor-outdoor cultivation. Let's scroll down to that. Numerous recommendations clarifying the cultivation, processing, packaging of marijuana by a marijuana cultivator shall take place in a limited access area where marijuana is not visible. Adding clarifying language to medical regulations that cultivation can cultivate for up to 2 additional licenses operated by the same entity owner. Refinements to the energy compliance requirements. Oh, and add disclosure requirements with respect to growing media and nutrients. Are there any questions or comments on this section? Sorry, again, a lot of scrolling to do. Next topic is additional operational requirements for retail sale, where two recommendations. One is to limit collection of consumer data by retailers to what is currently listed in the regulations: name, date of birth, address, primary telephone number, and email address. Second, allow pre-verification at one retail location to serve as pre-verification at multiple retail locations operated by the same retail licensee. Any comments or questions on this? Okay, next topic is collection of data. Let me scroll down to that, where the recommendation is to add to the additional operational requirements for retail and patient sales that potency levels derived from the cannabinoid profile contained within the finished marijuana product, including the amount of D9 THC and other cannabinoids, be recorded in metric. Questions on that? Mr. Executive Director, any metric issues that you'd be aware of if we make this change?
No.
Okay. The next topic is transfer of product. So this is about, I believe, clarifying that a medical establishment or an MTC may transport its marijuana products to other licensed establishments, which include both MEs and MTCs. Any questions or concerns about that? Okay. Next topic is sampling of product. Where the recommendation is that for marijuana establishments, allow cultivators to provide quality control samples to its employees and vendor samples to product manufacturers and retailers. Allow product manufacturers to provide quality control samples to its employees and vendor samples to retailers. Allow retailers to receive vendor samples from product manufacturers and cultivators and to provide those vendor samples to the retailer's employees. Explicitly, no samples to end consumers. Are there any questions on or comments on this topic? Then let's move on to topic, by my count, 33, which is product shape and color. Okay, recommend changes. One is to just define, make sure that the references to defined terms are consistent. Two is add as a prohibited shape for edibles, sporting equipment items. Three is to provide alternative stamping directly on edibles to allow wrapping individual servings and stamp the wrapper. Any comments or concerns about this? Commissioner McBride.
Just because we didn't talk about this
Right.
on the 19th, I do want to raise that I have concerns about the individual wrapping as opposed to stamping, and it's just primarily because once it's taken out of the wrapper, then if you don't have the stamp on it, you don't know if it's an item that contains THC, and that's relevant from the perspective of their version of product, especially if you're talking about something like a high school or something like that. So I just want to flag that as a concern that I have. I suspect there are going to be other.
Well, I think we might have lost temporarily Commissioner McBride, but thank you for raising that topic. We talked about this before. Are there any comments or questions, given that we did not discuss this as part of our policy discussions a few weeks ago?
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me one sec, Commissioner Flanagan. I just appreciate your energy on this topic, Commissioner McBride. Go ahead, Commissioner Flanagan.
So my group was tasked with addressing this issue, and I think that I share the same concerns that Commissioner McBride does. I think that we want to make sure the stamp is on the product as much as we possibly can. However, given that there are some products that are so small or they're unable to have the stamp on it that we're not, like, if you think about a microdose mint and how little that they are, that we're hoping that the packaging will be able to at least have something on it, because there was a concern about the physical stamping. It wasn't going to look like the actual symbol we wanted it to look like because of printing purposes. And that's why our team had decided to allow for the change.
Commissioner McBride?
Yep. So I appreciate that context. Could I maybe suggest that we think about, if this moves forward, that we think about making sure that this would dovetail with the product database and the inclusion of edibles in the product database. Folks might remember that we're doing sort of a phased in approach on items that are going to be included there. We're starting with concentrates, and the idea is to move into including edibles in relatively short order. So I think it would make sense to make sure that if this does go into place for implementation, that we're making sure that those two things dovetail.
Absolutely.
So again, now referring to General Counsel Bailey, do you have what you need from that dialogue? Or are there any questions or clarification you have?
I just would want, if I could, Chair, I just want to take a minute to see if the Executive Director wants to speak to the operational implications. From a drafting perspective, I feel like I'm all set.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think to address Commissioner McBride's question on the product database, I think that's actually a really good idea. If there's going to be a product, to Commissioner Flanagan's point, that is that the manufacturer at this point under this regulation, if approved, would not be doing the stamping, but instead placing the symbols on the packaging. I think at that point, the image we would seek from the manufacturer would be both in and out of the wrapper, so as to allow for anyone using the product database, be it a school resource officer or a parent or anyone that might come in contact with a product, to be able to discern and identify it in or out of the wrapping. So I think that's actually a really good idea and something we will incorporate into our ongoing conversations around the future iterations of that. But that's absolutely something we can begin to work on.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions on this section or this topic? Okay, thank you. So I think there were some references made to the next topic, which is the product database, where two recommended changes: define packaging and labeling pre-approval process, and add requirements for submission of information by product manufacturers and retailers for the commission-operated product database. Any comments or questions on this?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Flanagan?
I would just like to register my concern that I would rather have it mandatory than optional, especially given the conversation that we just had.
Commissioner McBride, since I know this has been a topic that you've been leading our debate on. Do you have comments on that?
Yep. So so the product database piece would be mandatory. Having products be uploaded into the product database would be mandatory. The optional piece is on the packaging pre-approval. I think if there's a reference to the recommendations there, our group, in looking at whether we on packaging pre-approval, whether we should do something, make something mandatory or make it optional, really was based largely on our ability to commit resources to it as a commission and what that commitment of resources would look like, and creating a potential for a bottleneck, and having the commission or the agency be the one that is keeping products from going onto shelves because of a review process there. So we opted to keep it optional, but to flesh out the process, which up to this point we haven't had a process. So we opted to flesh out a very specific process where packaging could be submitted to us, and we tried to make it as efficient as possible, so that hopefully there would be an incentive to submit packaging, and enable us to look at packaging where there is a question, but not make it mandatory, so that we were creating a bottleneck. We tried to kind of strike a balance there.
Commissioner Flanagan?
I have no more concerns. I appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this topic? Great. Let's move on to the next topic, which is repackaging, where there are 4 recommendations. Define repackaging and add it as an activity covered by the retailer license. Provide labeling requirements for repackaged marijuana. Include repackaging activity in safe handling provisions, and 4, require repackaged marijuana to comply with packaging provisions in 105(6). Any questions or comments on this? Okay, then move on to the next topic, which is contactless ordering. Excuse me while I get down there. Where the specific recommendation is to add operational requirements for advanced contactless orders to 500.140 and 501.140. Any comments or questions on this? Mr. Executive Director, you, again, from an implementation standpoint, you're comfortable that this is doable?
I am, yes.
Okay, thank you. Topic 37 is testing, where there are 2 recommendations. One is to institute regulations limiting remediation to not more than twice. If the product can't pass the second test, it must be destroyed. And 2 is to institute regulations that for failing product licensees, licensees may still have it reanalyzed, but it must be by another lab in the event that the product is tested twice and receives 1 pass and 1 fail result. So that all makes enormous sense. I know we've talked about this before, but any questions or comments on the testing, proposed testing regulations?
Just one question.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Title.
Under 500.1602, the additional screening for heavy metals and VEA for final ready-to-sell marijuana vaporizer products. I couldn't tell, is there a time frame there as far as before sale when the testing would need to be completed?
Commissioner McBride, is this your group that did the drafting here, or Commissioner? Or go ahead, Commissioner McBride, if you wouldn't mind, then please.
So I think the presumption is that it would be prior to it going onto shelves. If we need to clarify that, we can certainly clarify that. But all of this testing needs to be done prior to it appearing on a shelf.
Sorry, I meant a time frame in terms of how recent the test would have to be if it's on a shelf.
Got it. So we did not put in an explicit time frame, and I'd be interested to see what the public comment is back on that. Largely, we didn't put in a specific time frame because we couldn't land on a specific time frame. There's just so much that is unknown, and trying to sort of identify what the right date is, if they use the use by date, and how is that landed on, and what is the appropriate time frame. We didn't prescribe one, Now, that being said, there's another part of this that I was going to bring up also, which is that we have a sub-regulatory protocol, which really fleshes out a lot of what is included both in the vaporizer regulations and in the testing regulations. It's really the meat on the bones that I would suggest makes sense for us to probably put out alongside these regulations, and that is a protocol. The commission saw the draft of that back on June 19th, and it hasn't changed since then. So I think that getting some public comment on whether we need to narrow that time frame and what makes sense there, I am open to that very much.
Okay, so would you suggest that is a parallel but separate process to getting comments on the regulations, Commissioner McBride? I don't want there to be any confusion. I mean, I think the point you made is a great one, and I spoke with General Counsel and the Executive Director this morning. I think we're pretty close to having a finalized version of the protocols that we can disseminate, but I just want to make sure that we can keep it separate, even though we can do them simultaneously. Is that okay with you?
Well, I guess I would ask the Executive Director for his thoughts on that. What makes sense to do? I think that they're going to be read in conjunction, and they should be read in conjunction. So, putting them out together, but then making sure that people understand the nature of the regulations versus the nature of the sub-regulatory protocol. It's probably important.
Mr. Executive, thank you. Mr. Executive Director.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do agree with Commissioner McBride as far as there is a fulsome approach and a holistic approach to the testing regulations. And then I think, obviously, as you know, the protocol and any sub-regulatory guidance will breathe additional life into it. So especially as operators are looking at the scope and the potential impact of these changes, I do think the protocol would be helpful. But I also understand that they are two separate questions. So my intention would be as we work to, assuming that the commission finishes its work today and adopts draft regulations, we still, as you know, will need to package this and prepare it for filing. We can work simultaneously to prepare the protocol, because as Commissioner McBride has indicated, there have not been substantive changes since the commission viewed it first on June 19th to publish both alongside one another. I should also mention as well that, as the commission will recall, we've developed in our existing regulations a pathway and process for individuals or stakeholders to submit to the commission a petition for regulatory adjustment or change. We have received one on this topic, or not on this topic specifically, but on microbial specifically. That is a separate and distinct process as well, but there is a bit of overlap. My hope is to bring something to the commission in August, which will also contribute to this conversation, but all of this information is swirling, and the concern obviously is, as things swirl, it could lead to confusion. So as much as we can do to
that was my concern, but thank you.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm sorry. That was my concern about confusion, but what you just suggested, what Commissioner McBride suggested, makes perfect sense. So
I think that, to that point, I think our objective would be to diminish any confusion by clarifying, putting this information out, packaging it in a way that organizes the thoughts as well as organizes the commission's work. So again, I think the regulations with the testing protocol followed by this petition, because there is a bit of overlap, and I think we also want to be sure that we're responsive to those petitioners as well. So I hope I didn't add to the confusion, at least to the commission, but I think that approach makes sense and is something that is manageable from a staff standpoint.
Thank you. Respectfully, I don't feel confused at all. I hope that's true for, so I don't think you confused us. Commissioner McBride, where do we end up in terms of the question about timeline and sell-by date? Is that something that you recommend we just leave unstated and seek feedback during the public comment period on?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Tile, you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
yes, Executive Director.
As well. I also should have mentioned is our current process with licensees, and this, again, I hope doesn't add to confusion, but we shall see, is in our metric guidance, our existing metric guidance, as well as a pending matter before the commission. We accept tests for a period of 1 year. We would require a retest after, if a product had been, this is not specific to any type of product. This is all products. But we would accept the test as valid for 1 year. So that there is a long-term buffer there, but I think to Commissioner Title's point, knowing that our concerns have been around prolonged exposure and in the specifically vaping products having been sitting and the risk of any leaching or degradation there, we should note that any consumer or patient that is watching this, any product that would have had a test associated beyond 1 year, the Commission would require a retest to be conducted. That is true based on our metric guidance today.
Okay. Any other? Thank you, Mr. Executive Director. Any other comments or questions on this before we move on? Great. Topic 38 is patient certification and registration. There are multiple recommended changes here, so I'm not going to read them, but this is a pretty hefty section, not all of which was discussed as part of our policy discussions. So let me open it to my fellow commissioners if there are questions or concerns about this section, this topic.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Flanagan.
Are we, as a commission, going to determine which hardships are allowed to renew every 2 years instead of 1 year? Is there going to be a baseline for this?
And was this your writing group, Commissioner Title?
Yes.
Would you respond to Commissioner Flanagan, please?
Sure. So 501.109 indicates that certifications are valid for 1 year, except for the following circumstances, which would be valid for 2 years. So one is a patient receiving Social Security disability insurance or supplemental security income, and that's meant to capture all of those patients. And the second is if a certifying healthcare provider has diagnosed a qualifying patient after an in-person clinical visit with a terminal illness or a permanent disability and chooses to certify the patient for 2 years.
Okay, so it has to be a permanent disability.
Or a terminal illness. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Other comments or questions on this section?
The only other concern I have, Mr. Chairman,
yes,
is I realize that we're moving to sort of a telehealth world, and I think that's important for people, especially when they don't have access to doctors because they may live in rural areas. But my concern here is that if we define clinical visit to include in-person or telehealth, are we going to still continue them to see the doctor physically at least once a year or every other year? Or I guess I don't want to lose that in-person conversation, especially for new patients.
Sure. No, we had this conversation when we addressed this issue for the pandemic. Commissioner Title, do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with regard to new patients, especially. I wonder if it could be revised to not allow, at least once this emergency is over, that an in-person requirement would be required for the initial visit.
Mr. Executive Director, can you tell me what we in our executive order, administrative order that you issued, we addressed this issue, if I'm correct, at least administratively. Could you just provide an update of that or just remind us all?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did in the administrative action or in the bulletin, in the accompanying bulletin that went with it, we allow for telehealth means during the declared public health emergency. We do require that upon renewal, prior to renewal, that there be an in-person visit. So it accommodates the ability and the need at this point for these initial certifications to be conducted, assuming that the clinician has secured a waiver through the commission. But upon renewal and prior to renewal, which is a year at this point, would be required to conduct an in-person patient visit. So in a way, balancing the two. The draft regulation, as I read it at least, I don't believe requires that in-person consultation.
All right. So, Commissioner Flanagan, that was your point. You were recommending something more consistent with the administrative order.
Well, putting the pandemic aside, I want new patients to see their doctors.
Right.
I get telehealth for patients that you have an established relationship with their doctor. I think even given the pandemic, we say that once the emergency state of emergency is over, you've got to go see the doctor physically in person. If we're going to allow telehealth going forward, I want them to physically establish a relationship in person with a doctor if they're a new patient.
I agree. So if we keep that requirement and kind of recognize what's in the administrative order, the administrative order deals with the period during which the governor's executive order stays in place, and then the regulations revert to what you were just articulating. Is that correct, Commissioner Flanagan?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. Commissioner Title, do you have any thoughts on that, or?
I think that is reasonable, and I would support that, but I still think that would require a regulatory change. Maybe legal or the executive director can confirm, but currently I believe if the emergency ends, patients would need to see a doctor physically every year versus just initially.
So, Commissioner or General Counsel, could you comment on that, please?
Yes, so if I were to summarize, it sounds like the commissioners would like in emergency situations, whether it's COVID or another emergency, for telehealth to be an option. But if there is no state of emergency, there would be an initial physical visit. Is that right?
I guess I'm not sure.
Well,
Go
in my opinion, telehealth is available after your initial meeting if you're a new patient.
Okay,
Commissioner Title sees it differently.
It's not clear to me that you need to say anything about COVID or the emergency order in the regulations. That the administrative order or the executive director covers that. I don't believe it needs to be covered regulatorily.
Well, let me just say this. So we want to integrate telehealth, and there's an issue of that initial visit and then ongoing care. For an initial visit, should the regulation read that telehealth is an option if there's no emergency? My understanding is that we're going to say telehealth is not an option if there's no emergency situation.
Why are we not writing the regs without even including an emergency situation? I mean,
I'm just saying, if
we're going to have an executive order saying, okay, it's a pandemic, you're going to do telehealth, then that's just a temporary thing. Yeah, so if we're writing the regs, what I want to see happen is if you're a new patient, your initial meeting needs to be with a doctor. Then you can see a doctor through telehealth.
Okay.
If something happens and Sean, the executive director, issues an order, that will trump whatever this is.
Yeah.
So do we want, that makes sense to me. Do we want to write into the regulations the possibility that if there is an emergency, the executive director can be delegated the authority to issue an order?
I don't think we need to do that.
No, he already has that.
Okay.
He did it.
That's fine.
It's been done, so I don't think we need to do that. I mean, that's what I was saying initially. Commissioner Tiles, are you okay with what I think that seems to be the emerging sense, at least Commissioner Flanagan and myself on this?
Yes, I just want to recap. So this would require a change to the draft that clarifies that an initial visit must be an in-person visit. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
Commissioner McBride, you okay with that?
I'm fine with that. I mean, I suspect that there might be some other bumpers around telehealth, maybe that might come up during the public comment period, and I think we should be open to those. But I think that makes sense.
Great. And Sean, you're okay with that, Mr. Executive Director?
I am, yes. And I agree from a standpoint of, I believe that the authority is sufficient in the emergency context that the regulations don't need to be adjusted to reflect that circumstance.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are we good on this topic, or are there other questions or concerns? Okay. Topic 39 is personal caregivers and hardship cultivation. There's a lot here, and I'm not going to read it all, but included in the recommendations here are allowing caregivers to serve as a caregiver for up to 10 patients, prohibiting caregivers from receiving kickbacks from FTCs, allowing patients to cultivate up to 12 flowering plants without a hardship cultivation, allow out-of-state patients often coming to Massachusetts for our hospitals to be certified and registered as a patient in Massachusetts. These are issues that I think are important, and I'm not sure that we discussed extensively during our policy discussion. So I want to just put it on the table and get thoughts and concerns from fellow commissioners on this topic.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of concerns.
Go ahead, Commissioner Flanagan, please.
First and foremost, I think that 10 patients is a lot for one person to be a caregiver for. I think given the from what I've been told, the number of plants a patient might need, the amounts that a patient might need, I'd be really concerned that one person and one caregiver is taking care of 10 patients. And I'd really hope that caregivers and patients will weigh in on this during the public comment period. But one of the other things I also have a concern about is the out-of-state patients. I would be amenable to doing a carve-out for those that come here for end-of-life care. But I think given the fact that all but 3 states in the United States have medical programs, people are able to get medical treatment in their states without us having to get rid of the residency requirement here.
I can get some comments and thoughts on Commissioner Flanagan's concerns. I've got some opinions, but I'll wait. Go ahead, Commissioner Teitel. What are you going to?
Sure. That makes sense to me on both counts. I would be fine with clarifying that the patient change for those who are medical patients from out of state receiving medical care in Massachusetts would be eligible. I think that's precisely the population that this is intended to capture, so that clarification makes sense. In terms of the number of patients, I do also anticipate a lot of public comment on that. So we can certainly have the conversation now as well, or listen to public comment. The thinking of our group was that patients who are able to utilize the services of caregivers who are providing this service without compensation for their time is something that we wanted to maximize for patients with hardships, whether it's financial hardships or medical hardships. But of course, there has to be some kind of limit, both in terms of the plant canopy and the number of patients. So I anticipate more public comment, but happy to discuss it now as well.
Okay, Commissioner Teitel, if I could, I'm not sure that you and Commissioner Flanagan were aligned on the first topic. I heard Commissioner Flanagan say only for patients out-of-state patients came to Massachusetts for end-of-life care. If I heard Commissioner Flanagan correctly, I don't believe that's what you articulated, Commissioner Teitel.
Care. Okay.
Sorry, Commissioner Flanagan, am I putting words in your mouth?
No, I mean, I think that people, what you said is true. People come here because of the level of healthcare we have here in Massachusetts and the high level our hospitals provide. But again, New England, you can easily jump the borders of states and get healthcare wherever you want to go. So I think we should have a residency requirement, given the fact that people have medical in their own states. But if you're coming here for end of life care, whether it be cancer or a whole host of other illnesses, then certainly I think we can do a carve out if you're here for end of life care, because that's unfortunately a specific period of time. I don't agree with people just coming up here to get health care and then all of a sudden being part of our medical program. I have a lot of concerns about that.
Commissioner Teitel?
How would you feel about end-of-life care and cancer treatment?
I think I would think about it. I think there are other illnesses that people suffer from that are on the same level as cancer, but it's not, that they get treatment for. And I would hate to go down the road of explicitly listing the number of illnesses that people can come here for. I had someone very close to me suffer from Crohn's disease, which is very different now, but had a lot of difficulties. You know what I mean? And she didn't have cancer, but the difficulties that she had were just as bad. So I would think about it during the comment period, but I'm not sure if I would commit to just one illness, just given the variety that people suffer from.
Commissioner McBride, did you want to comment on this, or you don't have to?
No, I mean, I want to see what comes back with regard to public comment.
So with respect to, therefore, what we put into the draft regulations and receive public comment on, I think the proposal that Commissioner Flanagan made was end-of-life care only. Commissioner Tito, do you have a counter proposal in terms of what you would like to see included in the draft regulations? And you know, whatever we put in, again, we will get comments from in public comment period and public hearings and debate. We've learned from those comments, but go ahead, Commissioner Tito.
Right. Well, I think if someone is coming into Massachusetts for some reason to try and purchase cannabis, you know, if they're over 21, they can go to a store. But I understand the concern perhaps that just receiving medical care might be too broad. The feedback that we got specifically was from a physician who mentioned patients who are coming here for cancer treatment. So I would really like that to be included if we limit this.
Commissioner Flanagan, you okay with including that in the draft and then soliciting public comment and feedback and having a policy conversation before we finalize?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And then with respect to the number of caregivers, I also think that we should solicit public comment and input and have an informed discussion as part of our final draft. Go ahead, Commissioner McBride.
I did have a couple of thoughts with regard to the caregiver ratios.
Go ahead.
So I think I would like to see what comes back with regard to that specific ratio, and I imagine there's going to be a lot of feedback on that. One thing that I think we need to give some thought to, though, is so for instance, in the draft, it talks about a 500 square foot canopy being allowed. Was there thought given during the drafting of this about what the implications of having something like that would be? You know, 500 square foot canopy is going to have, you know, for instance, there's going to be electrical needs there, right? There are going to be things that are going to potentially, you know, implicate things like fire safety. And so I guess I imagine that I hope we get feedback on sort of what the pieces that have to kind of buttress that would look like. But I do think that there are other aspects here that aren't fleshed out in these regulations around things like, if we allow for a particular canopy, what does that mean? Are there inspectional requirements there? Is it, you know, we have, you know, some authority there, but what is our authority versus what is the authority of a municipality there? Would a municipality right now under these regs, it seems like they might not even know, and you can end up with a caregiver that potentially is going to have, we're going to have potentially several caregivers, right, operating up to 500 square foot of canopy in, you know, municipalities. Is there a requirement that the municipality, you know, be aware that that's going on? And, you know, just what are the aspects around this, like fire safety, that, you know, I think we need to be giving consideration to that is not in the current draft. So, you know, I think we can talk further about that here, but I think that if we're going to move forward with changing the caregiver to patient ratio, I think we also need to be thinking about these other elements and what they end up looking like.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner McBride. Commissioner Tito?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So we chose the 500 square feet of canopy based on Maine's limit. There is quite a bit of latitude, I guess, given to the commission under the hardship cultivation as it's currently drafted. But I think it makes sense to make that more specific. Fire safety makes sense. We may want to flesh out the record keeping requirements as well, particularly if it's a caregiver who perhaps is caring for more than 5 patients. There's probably a spectrum there as to what we need to see from that caregiver. Of course, it's a balance between understanding that this is a caregiver who's not being compensated and is doing this as a service. And so not wanting to put too much on them, relative to, say, a commercial grower, but at the same time, making sure that we're responsible in terms of what we're asking for with the registration. So certainly fire safety makes sense, record keeping makes sense, and there's probably more as well.
So thank you. Is it the sense commission that we just go forward as is, potentially changing the number or the max, but have the conversation, get the input, and make any proposed changes around the issues that you were both discussing as part of the final regulatory process? Or do we want to make changes that are promulgated as part of the draft regulations? Realizing that might, that's going to present some staff challenges, obviously.
I think if the question is, do we, move forward as they are and anticipate that we're going to need to make those changes? And I think that that's probably what we have to do at this point in time.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But I mean, I also think, there are other pieces though that, so, now we're going to enter into public comment period, and obviously we're going to be weighing, the public comment. But I also think that there are elements of this that really do require right now, internally, there to be thought given to these
Sure.
pieces as well. And I would also include in that things like, obviously, what our resources are, right? If we're gonna, whatever our requirements are going to be, what do we have available in terms of resources to actually implement something if there's going to be a heavier burden falling on the commission to be doing something like inspecting and doing spot checks and things like that, if that's even being considered. So I guess my issue is that there seems to be a lot of kind of unanswered questions or issues that are kind of lingering around this.
Okay. Thank you. And with respect, I know Commissioner Flanagan would like to re-engage on the out-of-state issue, but one last thing before we get there. Are we keeping the number 10, or are we proposing a different number for the draft regulations?
I don't mind keeping it with the caveat that we could change it.
Of course we can. Commissioners McBride, title?
A lot of what the ratio for me, a lot of what the ratio is going to look like is really going to depend on what is built around it. So at this point, keep it at that number, and then, figure out like what gets built around that. If we're going to keep it at that number, permanently.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Tyler, I presume you're okay with leaving it at 10?
I am, yes. I did just want to clarify, though, that there are already quite a few specifications under the hardship cultivation registration section that weren't added but were already existing. So an enclosed locked area, a consent for inspection, prohibitions on selling or giving away. So there are a number of answered questions, but also I think we did specifically consider that we didn't want to add more requirements for the commission to require certain documentation or specify certain frequency of inspections without discussing that internally first. So I say that to Commissioner McBride's point.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Flanagan, you wanted to reintroduce the topic of out-of-state patients?
Yeah, I wanted to know if Commissioner Title would mind putting in cancer or end-of-life care, because that would encompass other medical conditions that people are coming here for.
Commissioner Title?
Yes, absolutely. I think to your earlier point, Commissioner Flanagan, there are likely very serious illnesses that we are not considering, and we certainly couldn't name all of them. Cancer or end-of-life care. If there is a suggestion for a third open-ended category that would encompass a very serious medical condition, I'd like to add that. But if we're not ready to do that now, just cancer and end-of-life care makes sense to me.
Okay. General Counsel or Deputy General Counsel, Is there any, you guys, we just agreed to some language changes. Are you comfortable you have what you need in terms of the ability to make those changes to the draft?
In terms of out-of-state patients, I can put in cancer end-of-life care. Would the fact that somebody was in a hospice would be considered to be end-of-life care automatically?
I think by definition, hospice does include end-of-life care. But
So
again,
I'll
as
let-
Commissioner Title said, we can, I mean, for the purpose of the draft, we can say cancer or end of life and then talk to the medical professionals and see if there's that third category that once public comment period is over, we can include it at the end.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner McBride, you have another question?
I did, yeah. So I guess I would direct this either to legal counsel or to Commissioner Title. So also included is a provision that registered qualifying patients may possess up to 12 flowering plants and up to 12 immature or vegetative plants, excluding clones and cuttings. So I think that both of those things need, we need a definition there, probably, right, about what we would consider to be immature or vegetative plants. But I think that my larger question is, given the definition that's set forth in statute for marijuana, do we have, I mean, how does that play with sort of our ability to further define how we are treating the plants? Because I feel like the definition, I don't have it right in front of me, but the definition in statute is pretty prescriptive and pretty encompassing.
Go ahead, Commissioner Title.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to address our group's thinking on that. So particularly that this is patients who do not have a hardship cultivation, we wanted to make sure that these are categories that lay people could understand as much as possible, and that we were as consistent as possible with the existing definitions, to your point. And so when we exclude clones or cuttings, clones are defined in the regulations. We checked with the staff with expertise on immature or vegetative versus flowering or mature plants. And that made sense to them as a delineating indicator between two categories. And so we were trying to not have to add definitions with clone and flowering already being defined. And then in terms of the definition from the statute, we were going off of 94I section 1, which defines the 60-day supply as the amount of medical use marijuana that a registered qualifying patient would reasonably be expected to need over a period of 60 calendar days for the qualifying patient's personal medical use, up to 10 ounces of marijuana or as otherwise defined by the commission, understanding that these are not professional growers.
Commissioner McBride?
Okay, so I think that I appreciate that. I think that there may be some utility in giving some further definition here. And I think that's largely, a lot of the conversations that I've had around this have been raised by patients who express concerns about things like law enforcement not being able to tell the difference. And, you know, there being stories about sort of misapplication of laws when it comes to what someone might have on their property. And so I think that if, you know, what we're trying to do is kind of move towards a better, more fulsome understanding of what is allowed, that it might be helpful to provide a level of definition here so that we can, you know, among many other reasons, but, you know, one reason, sort of try to prevent maybe interactions that people have raised to me as concerning interactions and would allow for, you know, a level of guidance to be given around what is allowed to happen, you know, with regard to a home grow.
If I can add to that a bit more.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Tato.
That's exactly right. We gave that a lot of consideration so that we would be trying to have clear categories that wouldn't be defined in different ways by different people as much as possible. I'm sure that we will get feedback on that. But our group's thinking was that with clone being defined as the clipping from a plant that can be rooted or grown, that once it is rooted, it's then an immature plant. I expect that we'll get public comment suggesting different ways to define perhaps height. But then the third category of flowering plants being defined as the reproductive state in which the plant produces flowers. So flowers, trichomes, and cannabinoids. So we wanted to stick with those definitions as much as possible and then perhaps expand on them for anyone who may need to be enforcing these regulations or just wanting to understand them better. But we wanted to make sure that we didn't contradict the current definitions in any way.
Okay, thank you. Again, I request from our counsel, our general counsel or deputy, I know our general counsel is having some technology issues. I don't know if they're resolved yet, but either she or our deputy general counsel, do you have clarity on what we just discussed and the modifications that we made to the draft regulations?
Pauline, I can address it in part, but then ask you to maybe address some issues that came up before I got back onto the computer. In terms of the hardship cultivation, we're not making any changes before the filing of the draft, is my understanding.
Correct.
Unless Pauline has any other comments, I'm fine.
That was the clarification I needed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Anything else?
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Director.
I hate to intrude and return to a discussion.
You're not intruding whatsoever. You're actually adding value.
I just want to, on the out-of-state residence piece, just illuminate a bit on what I believe implementation would look like, because I think it's actually pretty complicated for a number of reasons. But I think it's also something we can spend the time during the public comment period to flesh out. As the commission will recall, we now have the new patient portal, which we spent significant time developing and rolling out. And I think it's been met with success, and primarily because a lot of the functionality is automated to our sister state agencies, primarily the RMV. As we've waived patient fees as well, that makes our manual review relatively limited. We've also just introduced the pediatric patient application into it. As these would be out-of-state patients, we would need to verify manually their IDs, which would be a manual staff process. And the other concern I would have, and again, I just need to work through and manage this, is we would now be in receipt of medical records potentially, which concerns me from a HIPAA standpoint and a data protection, as well as the address we would have on file would be an out-of-state address. We're now going to pay to print a card and mail it to an address that they would not necessarily be at. Again, I think the easy solution without overthinking it is to capture a local address where we could send that information, wanting to be sure the turnaround time though is sufficient so as to provide them access to medicine they need while they're here in the Commonwealth. So I just want to be clear that I think implementation of this could take some time, and want to be honest about that, and also the complexities that we'd have to work through.
I really appreciate you raising that, and I do appreciate your willingness to spend some time thinking them through as we get public comments. So my notes reflect that as we discuss this as part of our policy discussion for final regs. Absolutely want that to be part of the consideration. So appreciate you raising that. Yes, General Counsel.
Chairman, may I ask, would the commission be inclined for me to build out a regulatory provision that required a local address, since the decision was already made to have them be receiving care in the Commonwealth?
I think let's leave implementation alone. I think, again, I think we've come to an agreement that, we're going to propose the language that Commissioners Flanagan and Title talked about with respect to qualifying conditions. But let's leave things like local address and other implementation issues aside until we get public comment. The executive director does the analysis that he just was articulating about what the implementation challenges might be, and based upon the public comment period and Mr. Executive Director's analysis, we make a decision about if and how to implement. So I don't think we need regulatory language with respect to that right now. I think we're set with just changing the regulatory language, which is under what conditions out-of-state patients would qualify. Unless there's any disagreement from my fellow commissioners on that. Okay. Anything else on this topic? Okay, thank you. We have one last topic, number 40, which is home delivery, where the recommendation is that allow an MTC to deliver themselves or through a third-party company with a delivery license. However, the regulation states that only MTC registered agents can deliver for an MTC. We need to clarify that in addition to MTC agents, registered agents under a delivery license can also deliver for an MTC. So this is I don't think anything other than a regulatory clarification. Are there any questions or comments on this? Okay. That is it for the topics that were both discussed and raised as part of our policy conversation. And to Commissioner McBride's earlier comment, we had a conversation on several issues that were not discussed as part of our policy comment discussion, but are included in the draft regulations that we're discussing. It's just before noon. I think we're doing pretty well here. Again, just to remind people, we've got to go through definitions, but only those definitions that were not already covered as part of this policy conversation, or these topics that we covered. We then have to talk about co-located, and again, I will leave time for additional issues to be raised by my fellow commissioners. But I think we're doing pretty well. I need a break. My question to the commission is, should we take a lunch break or just a short break and try to power through and push lunch back a little bit? I'm open either way. I do need a break, but lunch or just a quick coffee break. Commissioner Title, you have preference?
I'd be fine with like 15 minutes.
Okay, Commissioner McBride?
Lunch.
Lunch. So how long would you like for lunch, Commissioner McBride?
30 or 45.
Okay, and Commissioner Flanagan?
I'm good with whatever.
Okay, so let's do lunch. That's okay. It's 12 o'clock. Do you think we can do a half hour, Commissioner McBride?
Sure.
So can we go into recess then until 12:30? Okay, thank you. See you then. Welcome back. You can see Commissioner Flanagan, Commissioner Title, Commissioner McBride, are you back? Commissioner Title, Commissioner McBride?
Hi.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks very much, guys. Let's move into the second order of business, which is to go through definitions. Again, just to be as clear and explicit as possible, a lot of the discussion we just had on the 40 topics, the regulatory changes that were consistent with those topics, some of them are reflected in changes in the definitions, but the staff has additionally made some recommendations for changes in definitions that were not covered by the conversation we just had on the 40 topics, and so I wanted to just go through them, the recommended change from staff that were not covered, just to make sure there are no issues. So if people can look through the document that Deputy General Counsel when sent out that was on definitions, I will highlight the areas that have changed or the definitions that have changed to make sure that we're okay. So is everybody okay with that? And again, I'm just going to do this by omission. So anything that I don't cover in the definition section either has no changes or has been previously discussed in the earlier part of our conversation today. So in 500.002 definitions, the first change is to cannabinoid profile. You have the track changes version in front of you, so I'm not going to read the changes. I'm just going to go through definition by definition and just see if there are any issues or concerns. So the first one is cannabinoid profile. Any concerns? Second is cannabis. Third is cannabis or marijuana accessories. Next is cannabis or marijuana products. Next is close associate. Next is co-located marijuana operations. Next is edible cannabis products, edible marijuana products, or edibles. Next is equity holder. Next is executive. Next is marijuana or cannabis. Next is marijuana accessories or cannabis accessories. Next is marijuana establishment agent. Next is marijuana infused product. Next is marijuana products for cannabis products, or cannabis products, excuse me, marijuana products or cannabis products. Next is marijuana transporter. Next is medical use cannabis or marijuana. Next is MTC agent. Next is persons or entities having indirect control. Next is tincture. Next is residential solvent. That's it for the proposed definition changes in 500. Before I move on to 501, are there any, can I just have a positive affirmation that my fellow commissioners are okay with the changes that are recommended?
Yes.
Yes. Commissioner Flanagan?
No.
You're not, where do you have an issue?
I don't.
Oh, you don't have any issues?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, appreciate that. Now let's move into 501.002, which is medical use definitions, and there's going to be a lot of overlap with the proposed changes to the adult use definitions. So again, first one is cannabis or marijuana. Second is cannabis or marijuana accessories. Next is cannabis or marijuana products. Third is close associate, or I'm sorry, next is close associate. Next is co-located marijuana operations. Next is marijuana infused products, edibles, MIPS. Next is equity holder, executive, marijuana or cannabis, cannabis or marijuana accessories, marijuana establishment agent, marijuana infused product, cannabis or marijuana products, marijuana transporter, medical use cannabis or marijuana, MTC agent, formerly an RMD agent, persons or equity or entities having indirect control, residual solvent, and finally tincture. Again, can I have a positive affirmation from each of my fellow commissioners that you're okay with these proposed changes?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner McBride, yes? Yep, I see. I'm sorry, I see your thumb going up. Thank you very much. Can I just ask Deputy General Counsel Nguyen, did I cover everything that is proposed in terms of changed definitions? Pauline?
Yes. Yes, it
Okay.
looks like that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your help on preparing me to go through it that way. Thank you. Next topic for discussion then is the co-located regulations, and I'm going to ask either General Counsel Bailey or Deputy General Counsel Nguyen to just give an overview of what's being proposed in this section. Christine or Pauline, would you?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you may recall, and as you mentioned earlier, with the transfer of the medical program, the Commission identified a need to have a separate set of regulations that would help those RMDs to basically apply for and build out for an adult use license. Now that the Commission has both programs, one of the goals of this regulatory review process was to determine whether these regulations were necessary. Your particular working group examined this primarily with the help of Christopher Smith, our AGC, and made some determinations to move some specific provisions into the adult and medical use regulations. So if these changes are ultimately voted on by the Commission, we will effectively be eliminating this set of regulations.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, General Counsel, and I just wanted to I think I said this earlier, you just said it, my deep gratitude to AGC Christopher Smith, did a painstaking job of moving each relevant piece of the co-located regulations into the appropriate section of the adult use and medical regulations, and then putting together a matrix showing exactly, mapping exactly how those movements occurred. So thank you, Christopher, for that. Can I ask my fellow commissioners, are there any questions or concerns about this work? and the proposed change and elimination of the co-located regulations?
No.
Commissioner Flanagan?
No.
Commissioner McBride?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. The last topic that I wanted to cover is I promised to leave room for other issues from commissioners that did not come up in the previous 3 parts of this conversation. Again, my caveat is that if there's no draft language around any issues that are raised, it's going to be very problematic and perhaps impossible to get them into the draft regulations that will be promulgated shortly. But I don't want to preclude any conversations, and so let me turn it over to each of my fellow commissioners and see if there are additional topics that they would like to discuss. Again, those topics are related to the draft regulations, obviously. So let me start. Since you're up on the screen, Commissioner McBride, let me ask you if you have additional topics you would like to raise with respect to the draft regulations.
I wanted to raise whether there had been consideration, it didn't fall into my group, but whether there had been consideration about vertical integration and getting rid of vertical integration and opinions on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm going to ask for some help again from our general counsel. That was discussed in Commissioner Doyle's group.
That's correct.
And let me keep going, then I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner General Counsel. And they came up with several alternatives, one of which is just waiting for the appropriate legislative action or the necessary legislative action. The recommendation of that group was not to proceed at this time due to the complexity of implementation without a change to the legislation. General Counsel Bailey wrote a memo on that topic to me, which I'm happy to share, but maybe you could summarize that memo, General Counsel.
Yeah, so Chairman, thank you. I'm not going to go too much into detail in my legal opinion because then it would not be privileged. But I think basically your description is correct, is that the writing group in general was indicated that there may be a need for legislative change here. There were a couple of options that were explored, and I rendered a legal opinion that those options would create some legal problems. That legal opinion was shared, obviously, without violating the open meeting law with all your fellow commissioners, so they're aware of the details of my legal opinion.
Thank you, General Counsel. Commissioner McBride.
I did get those documents. I also, Commissioner Doyle's recommendation was also circulated. And it was my understanding that there were 2 options there, and that it was the second option that her group actually was recommending, that would not require a statutory change. So I'm curious about the merits of that second option and
Sure.
Why we should not be pursuing that second option.
So if this is fine with
Good time.
Okay, so I should say, Commissioner McBride, I think your recollection is a little bit more accurate, that she did put forward an endorsement option. In other words, an endorsement on an MTC license that would enable them to basically seek endorsements to conduct separate license activities at more than the statutorily allowed locations. And my legal opinion was that that created problems because, in effect, the endorsement system would be basically trying to get around the licensing system and would not effectuate the legislature's intent that there would be a limitation on the number of licenses an MTC could have. I guess
that wasn't my reading of it. My reading of it was that it would maintain the licensing requirement and that it wouldn't lift any caps. It wouldn't change any caps on the free, right? Kind of right now, the way that it stands with an MTC is that you essentially have 3 that are vertically integrated, or, if you break those apart, you've got 3 in each category, right? So you have 9 overall. That it wouldn't change that number structure. It wouldn't change the cap structure, but would change the I guess manner of allocation among a licensee that could then kind of have a cafeteria plan of choosing to operate components of a medical license that currently are vertically integrated. If they want to operate on the retail side and not the other two components, they could choose to do that, etc. So I guess the reason that I'm raising this is because I feel like this is I feel like there's still a discussion to be had on that, and that this wasn't raised in June. I'm not sure when the appropriate time would have been. I mean, I don't want to be. I'm raising this because this has only recently come onto all of our radars, and so I don't know how to proceed with this, but I do feel like there's some additional discussion that should be had there.
Commissioner McBride, do you have any, you kind of answered the question I'm about to ask you, but do you have any thoughts on how we might be able to discuss this issue given where we are in the process?
Well, I imagine that we are going to get a lot, as we have before, that we're going to get a lot of comment on vertical integration and on changes to vertical integration. So it may be that it is appropriate to be addressing it as part of the public comment period and kind of integrating those public comments that we might get on it. But I think that we all need to be prepared for this to be something that we are looking at in the next month as we go through public comment.
Thank you. I agree with that. General Counsel, do you have any comment on that suggestion by Commissioner McBride?
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me if this is an area in which the public wants to submit some public comment. It may be one of those situations where like minds could disagree as to whether this would be viewed as consistent with the statutory limitations or inconsistent with the statutory limitations. So to the extent that we receive public comment in that regard, I think it could be helpful to the commissioners.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner McBride, any other topics?
Sorry, no.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Title.
First, just on the same topic, my reading is the same as Commissioner McBride's, and I think there was a significant amount of work that was put into this by Commissioner Doyle, so I would like the opportunity to discuss it however we can, and maybe that means after public comment. Right. So this is a good time to bring up another.
That's what this part of the meeting was designed for. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Title.
Sure. So for discussion purposes, multiple delivery applicants, pre-certified applicants and prospective business owners have brought up the idea of sharing space. And sharing space in general is not new. This is a question that came up in our equity work plan in April 2019. But the specific questions about delivery applicants sharing space are new, I think, because I think that the regulations were not necessarily written with the delivery location in mind, not having products and not having the same, say, security needs that other facilities might have. And so there's ongoing legal work, there's ongoing staff analysis on this issue that I believe all the commissioners have, but I just wanted to raise that for public comment purposes. And then finally, I don't mean to repeat something that's come up before, but I just wanted to say again that I really support delivery businesses having the opportunity to wholesale. That's it.
So Thank you very much, Commissioner Todd. My understanding is that there are proposed regulations changing operational requirements for delivery. Plus, we are promulgating the entire set of regulations, not just the changes, which include delivery regulations. So it is appropriate to solicit comments from the public, and it's appropriate for us to discuss whether we wish to make any changes based upon those comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Commissioner Flanagan, anything else you'd like to add?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Then I believe we are done with the agenda. I'm going to ask for two motions, but before I do, Commissioner, or excuse me, I keep calling Commissioner. I guess which thing? General Counsel. Is there anything else that you need other than the motions that I'm about to ask for and the votes I'm about to ask for? Is there anything else you need to take the next step here?
I think we're in legal, we're all set, Chairman. I would ask Pauline to speak up if there's anything she wants clarification on.
I'm good. Thank you.
And Mr. Executive Director, anything else that you feel you need? Because the delegation that I'm going to ask the staff to, the commission to make is to you directly. So is there anything else you feel like you need, Mr. Executive Director, before I ask for that motion?
There is not, no.
Okay, thank you. So then, as I said, I'd like to ask for two motions and two votes. The first on the regulation specifically, I'd like to ask for a motion that the commission approve the 3 sets of draft regulations and changes made as a result of its deliberations, and for the regulations to be finalized and filed with the Secretary of State's Regulations and Publication Divisions, including 935 CMR 500.000 adult use of marijuana, 501.000 medical use of marijuana, and 502.000 co-located medical and adult use marijuana operations. Can I have such a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
I'm sorry, that was Commissioner McBride that made the motion to approve?
Yes.
Okay, let the record show that Commissioner McBride made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Flanagan. Commissioner Flanagan, your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman? Aye. Let the record show the commission unanimously approved the motion. Thank you very much. The next motion I would like to ask for is on delegation to staff. I'd like to ask for a motion that the commission allow the executive director and his delegates to finalize the draft regulations, make further changes consistent with commission's deliberations and votes, the commission's governing laws and the regulation division's requirements, and to take any additional steps necessary to file the draft regulations with the regulations division, to provide notice and seek public comment on the regulations, and to eventually make recommendations to the commission on final regulations. Can I have such a motion, please?
So moved.
I think there's all three of you simultaneously. Commissioner
I'll
Title,
second.
Is it accurate to say that the motion was made by Commissioner Title and seconded by Commissioner Flanagan?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Flanagan, your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman, aye. Let the record show the commission unanimously approve the motion. Thank you very much. Could we, Erica, put up the next meeting slide? Well, that's you. Okay, sorry. Let's do this. Thank you. Before we get to the next. No, I'm sorry. Thank you. Just again, a notice about the public comment period. Public comment period will officially open when the commission files the draft regulations with the Secretary of the Commonwealth. I don't have an exact date on it, given that the staff has to do some follow-up work based upon the conversation we just had, but it will be soon. But please see our website for updates. Please send all public comments on draft regulations to commission@cccmass.com, and the public comment period will close at 5 p.m. on August 14th. Thank you. Now, if we could go to the next meeting slide, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so we just finished, we're about to adjourn as soon as there's a motion to do so. Our meeting on July 20th, which is we voted on proposed regulations, and we announced that the public comment period will open when the draft regulations are filed with the Secretary of State. We will have a public hearing again by Zoom meeting, not by Zoom, but excuse me, Microsoft Teams live meeting on August 3rd. I urge everybody to participate in that. We will have a regularly scheduled monthly commission meeting on August 6th. As I just mentioned, the public comment period will close on the 14th of August. We will have a regularly scheduled monthly commission meeting on September 10th. And on the 24th September, we will have a public meeting to vote on final regulations based upon feedback that we got from the public hearings and the public comment period. Again, my very strong recommendation and request to participate in the public hearings and/or submit public comments. In all previous rounds of regulatory development, including the first, we have made substantive changes to the draft regulations based upon the feedback that we got in the public hearings and the public comment period. So please take advantage of those opportunities to speak to us and make your recommendations and suggestions and raise issues. Thank you very much. There being no further business before the commission, may I ask for a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Flanagan made the motion to adjourn, seconded by Commissioner McBride. Commissioner Flanagan, your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman, aye. Let the record show that the commission unanimously voted to adjourn at 12:56 p.m. on July 20th. Thank you very much. Be safe, everybody.